for all the officers that are listening, there is no good death notification, but there is a bad one. Yes. There is no good death notification. There is a bad one. When I go to police departments and I'll ask the training lieutenant, who taught you how to do the death notification? I always hear this, just learning on the fly. So some people say, well, what do you teach then? We teach how to do a loving and honest death notification. That's what we're going for. Yeah. Care and honesty.
Welcome to the Hey Chaplain podcast. My name is Jared Altick, and I'm a chaplain with the police department. This podcast exists so that cops can hear encouragement from other cops, so that you can be a wiser, healthier person. From the LAPD to Scotland Yard, the guests on Hey Chaplain are giving you the wisdom gleaned from their experience so that you don't have to learn the hard way. There are a lot of police trainers out there, but probably my favorite trainer on the subject of peer support and first responder chaplaincy right now is Dr. Barry Young. I've been to several of his classes, and I am just amazed at his ability to be interesting, informative, and funny for 6 hours. And I'm also a little jealous of his ability to capture the names of almost everybody in the room and be so personable. So, between his trips crisscrossing the country, I asked Barry to come into my office and cover an important topic: death notifications. It's shocking how little and how poorly this subject has been taught, because it directly affects the relationship between a community and its police department. Every death notification leaves a permanent mark on at least two people: the recipient and the notifier. Here's Barry Young. Hello, Barry. How are you today?
I'm good, Jared. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm so glad you're here, sitting in my office, sitting right across the desk from me. It's exciting to have you here.
I'm honored to be here, sir. Very much so.
Well, tell me a little bit about yourself. Where have you served as a chaplain?
So I've been a chaplain with the Independence Police Department for almost 20 years.
Okay, and Independence is a suburb of Kansas City.
Yeah, Independence on the Missouri side is the second largest police department on the Missouri side of the state line. Okay. And we police a city of about 150,000.
And so you've been a police chaplain there, and there's lots of responsibilities that you've had there, but one of them have been making death notifications.
So the chaplains want to be a way to assist the officer. Mm-hmm. So if an officer wants to make a death notification by themselves, they can make it by themselves. Mm-hmm. If they want to make it and have the chaplain present, which I've had officers say, Barry, I want to make it, but I want you to be there. And then sometimes an officer says, Barry, I don't want to be the death notification officer. Can you give the notification and I'll be there for you?
Right.
So
I actually offer that a lot of, especially my younger detectives and younger officers. I'm like, look, give me the information. I'll make the knock. I'll start it, then I'll hand it off to you. And a lot of detectives give out this huge sigh of relief, like, oh, good. Okay, I can answer questions. I can give out phone numbers, but they didn't necessarily want to break the news.
So. Jared, I love that. I call that the buffet approach. If you just go to an Asian restaurant, you better like Asian. Or if you go to a barbecue restaurant, we're in Kansas City, you better like barbecue. But the buffet for the officer is you can make it, I can make it, or one of us can back the other up.
Exactly. So when you're doing notifications, ideally the person's home and you have all the info. And you find the person that you want to talk to, and you relay the information in a careful and kind way. There's no problems communicating. Everything's settled. You walk away. Job was done. It doesn't always just turn out exactly by the book, though.
Yeah, if I can, could I just define this? Because I know this audience of police officers, this is second hat, but maybe you're a new officer, you're just right out of the police academy. The clinical definition of a death notification is when you as an officer inform a loved one that a loved one they care about has died.
Yeah.
And the problem with the death notification is, this is kind of the street definition of a death notification. You're giving somebody the worst news they've ever heard with no time to prepare. My dad was a World War II veteran. He got cancer, and I hate cancer. But the only good part about cancer is you've got time to say things that need to be said.
Yeah.
And so whenever I use the term death notification, I use the street definition. We're giving somebody the worst news they've ever heard with no time to prepare.
Yeah.
one of the many difficulties about policing, and the fun part about policing, is every day is different. So most of the time on a death notification, I'm called out, and an officer, typically in patrol, or a detective will be with me, will inform the family that a loved one has died. I got a weird dispatch call. Dispatch called me and said, Barry, we don't want you to go to the home of the deceased. We want you to go to the next door neighbor. And I'm like,
that's not normal.
No. And I called dispatch. I'm like, let me make sure here, because I don't want to give this information out to somebody that's not supposed to. I said, the home and the family of the deceased, don't contact them. That's right, Chaplain. And I said, what do you want me to do? They said, go to the elderly next door neighbor. And they said, when you get there, talk to the sergeant in charge of the scene. So I show up to the sergeant, to the scene, and I said, Sarge, I know dispatch made a mistake. You want me to go over to the deceased family? No. And I said, can you tell me, Sarge, what you want me to do? And the Sarge said, well, it was so complicated over dispatch, I want to explain it to you. The deceased was a young, early 20-something female in Independence, Missouri. She had mental health issues, and the problem is, with mental health issues, 80% of the mentally ill don't know they're mentally ill. And even those that do don't want to talk about it often. So what happens is this young 20-something, she's very suicidal. She's contemplating dying by suicide. And finally, she builds up the nerve, but she doesn't know how she's going to take her own life. So she goes to her next door neighbor. He was a 70s, 80s military veteran, loves our country, served our country. He was a warrior. And with her puppy dog eyes, she looks at him and said, sir, I live here in Independence right next to you, and I'm scared there's going to be a home invader. I'm a single woman. Could you show me how to load a semi-automatic firearm and charge the weapon? She didn't know anything. She didn't know to use that terminology. She just had I can't remember. She said, can you show me how to use this? So this former 70s, 80s-year-old veteran shows her how to load the magazine, how to put the magazine in the firearm, how to charge the weapon. And the next day, she used that knowledge, put that pistol in her mouth, and blew her head off.
Yeah.
So the sergeant said, Barry, we want you to perform the death notification because this is so different than normal. Not only are we going to deal with the grief that the deceased has now died, not only are we going to deal with the guilt that could we have done more, but it's his knowledge that was given in a pure heart that she used to take her own life. Her.
Yeah. I had no idea that they would cause harm.
Jared, you nailed it. His heart was, there's a young woman in Independence in a maybe a salty area, and this can help save her life.
Yeah. Yeah. Boy, what is that? I mean, you're absorbing that, and there's always a bit of a time crunch. I mean, nowadays, I've had multiple death notifications that have been circumvented by social media. And so people find out, and a lot of people just look out their window and see cop cars, and they assume the worst. And so a lot of them know, and we're not so much notifying as confirming. But there is kind of a ticking clock there. So the sergeant explains this to you, and I presume you then square up to the front door and go talk to this guy, right?
So on the death notification, typically when you're given a death notification to a military veteran, it's easier because these men and women have been around death. They've counted the cost. They've seen mortality. This gentleman, when we delivered the death notification, there was a shock, for lack of a better term, a double shock. Not only has this neighbor died, but she died because of the knowledge that he gave her. And it was just an avalanche. I mean, here's a guy that's been around death and dying. Yeah. He's been in combat, and it was like the first time.
Yeah.
And the sheer volume of guilt he had, it was just different than combat. You're informing this man that this woman has died by suicide, and it was something that the police academy didn't prepare me. Bible college didn't prepare me. It was unusual.
Yeah. Now, generically speaking, not specifically your situation, but in a situation like that, you have a limited amount that you can do for the person, kind of a crisis counseling, sort of like let me talk to you here for the next 10 minutes, maybe for the next hour, but short term. And then sometimes you have resources to offer long term. Did either of those come into play in your situation, or which ones would you expect to come into play in a situation like that?
For this person that was elderly, and I mean, I've not seen him since. He's probably no longer with us. For younger folks at the Independence Police Department, we give out a death notification brochure. That didn't come into play because of this man's vast experience with death and dying. Right. And he himself was a widow. He himself was all alone. Yeah. For him, the greatest treatment was just talking to him and letting him empty out. And then I'm not sure if you're familiar with Ford, but Ford is a listening technique where you start asking them about their family, their occupation, their retirement, their desires. Yep. And so I started asking him, tell me about your career. And it was crazy. Just asking him to start telling stories was probably the most therapeutic thing I think that could have been done for him.
Yes. Excellent. Yeah. Being there and being present is a ministry to that person. And yes, you can't be there 24 hours a day. At some point, you are going to have to leave. I frequently am scrambling, looking for, okay, who can step in and replace me? I've had death notifications where it was a neighbor of the person I was making the notification. And in a world where we often don't know our neighbors, we're hidden behind garage doors and privacy fences, and we just don't interact like we used to maybe a couple generations back. I have witnessed some wonderful neighbors who were able to come in and help. If I can stay until a family member can get there, and then the person's not alone, that is usually kind of a key milestone for me. As a family member on their way, they'll be here in 15 minutes. Well, I will stay until they get here for sure. But even just during that brief time that I'm there with them, that is an important ministry. And using that technique to get them to talk about themselves, get them to reminisce and to be processing verbally, that's incredibly helpful.
Yeah, so many times police officers, chaplains feel like, what are they going to say in that moment? And I've kind of flipped the script on that. If you can get somebody that's hurting to start to tell their story, it's amazing how that fills those awkward silences.
Yeah.
And I love what you said, the power of presence.
Yeah. We often think about that as chaplains in terms of being present for the officer, which is important. The key advantage that a chaplain has over other helpers, over the counselors and the doctors and everybody else, is that we're in the patrol car and we're in the police station, and we are familiar with their work lives in a way that they don't have to explain to us. They don't have to translate it for us. We're present in their work life, and so we can help them with stuff that happens.
I view the chaplain's primary calling is just to be a servant. I'm not there to preach to anybody. I'm not there to tell anybody how they live. I'm just there to serve. And I know you've heard me say this. I never go to a dead body call, to a shooting, to a burglary, and I never say, how can I pray? I always say, how can I help? Yeah. And sometimes that's passing out water, that's passing out food. Yeah. If an officer ever says, hey, Barry, could I talk to you for a second? Or, hey, Barry, could you pray with me? Man, I'm glad to do that. But I'm just there to serve. Yeah. And I say this a lot. If serving people's below you, then leading people's beyond you. The goal of the chaplain, I'm just there to be a servant.
Yeah. That presence that we have, with those officers is an incredibly important part, just central part to being a chaplain. But then when we go and serve the citizens, it's the same feature, the same function that we have where we can be with them and be there during that time. I've had people come up and hug me, and I'm thinking, boy, I didn't really do anything but stand here solemnly. But being present meant the world to them.
I hate to say this. What I love about being available for death notifications is never in the history of policing has community connection been more important. And a death notification is an opportunity for the officer to get closer to the community. When a death notification is done correctly, it engages the department. It gets them closer to the community. When the death notification is done incorrectly, unfortunately, it's an opportunity for the community to disconnect from law enforcement.
Yeah. What's the worst mistake that you could make in a death notification?
So I think if I could give a couple worst mistakes that you can give on death notification, I would say 2. Number 1 is never lie, but don't be overly graphic. Never lie, but don't be overly graphic. So police oftentimes are around death and dying, especially if you're in traffic, especially if you're a detective. And so what happens is we're informing a loved one that their loved one has died. Let's not lie, but don't be overly graphic. When a police officer says they blew their brains against the wall, the eyes are on the ground. I mean, we need to inform.
Family doesn't need that.
That's exactly right. And I think a second thing is if an officer says, I know how you feel. You know, I never tell anybody, even if I've had a similar experience, I never say, I know how you feel.
You don't want to assume. Don't assume how they're going to react, because everybody reacts differently to trauma. There's not really a right or wrong way to react to trauma. Being traumatized hits the random button. And so the random number generator goes off in our brain, and really people have all kinds of strange reactions when they're traumatized. So don't assume how they'll react, but also don't assume anything else. Don't assume if you're looking for Bob Smith at a certain address, you can almost be guaranteed there's going to be a Bob Sr., a Bob Jr., a Bob the Third, and another guy named Pete who goes by Bob. And
Yes.
you just don't know. And so don't assume. I'm very deliberate. Are you this person that I'm looking for? Name and birth date. Are you related to this person? Name and birth date. And that seems really slow and deliberate and elaborate, but it's important, because if you make a death notification and someone thinks that a different family member died, you could never take that back. And so you have to get it right. And that's critical for me. Could you give me some other do's and don'ts? I know you have a good list, but what's a few of the ones that you think are particularly important?
So you nailed the first one, identify and confirm. And I think the second one is just take the Band-Aid off. You know, when you show up at 1:30 in the morning, they don't want to talk about the sports. They don't want to talk about the weather. Why are you here? They're not stupid. A black and white shows up. They know you're here for something. And so never lie. Don't be overly graphic. But once you identify and confirm, take the Band-Aid off. Ma'am or sir, I'm sorry to tell you that your son was killed in a tragic auto accident. And if I could give the biggest don't is don't say we lost them. Yeah. So when you tell a civilian we lost them, you may hear this, well, what do you mean we lost them? Do we have to put something on Facebook and find them?
Yeah, form a search party.
Don't say they didn't make it. What do you mean they didn't make it? Do we got to put a bolo out? We've got to tell them in a clear and concise form, ma'am or sir, I'm sorry to tell you that your wife, your husband, your son or daughter, they died in an auto accident tonight. And so many first responders are scared to use that word death or dying. But if you use, they didn't make it, we lost them.
Any other euphemism.
It will not bring closure. It will bring confusion.
Yeah. And how cruel is that on the worst day, getting the worst news, that you also added confusion?
So I was in Chicago, Illinois doing a class. And as I'm teaching, I see this woman in the front. She just starts bawling. And I'm like, I've never had that happen. On the break, I came up to her to see if I could do anything for her. And she told me her son died by suicide, but the police officer that delivered the death notification harmed her emotionally than even the bad news. For all the officers that are listening, there is no good death notification, but there is a bad one. Yes. There is no good death notification. There is a bad one. When I go to police departments and I'll ask the training lieutenant, who taught you how to do the death notification? I always hear this. Just learning on the fly. So some people say, well, what do you teach then? We teach how to do a loving and honest death notification. That's what we're going for. Yeah. Care and honesty. So when we talk about do's and don'ts of death notification, we strongly recommend any death notification that you give out grief material when you perform the death notification. And the reason is, the moment I tell a woman, your husband has died, everything after that is going to go over her head. She's not going to hear it. Right. Or if it's a dad,
blur. Yeah.
Everything will be a blur after that. Probably one more death notification, do or don't, is we strongly recommend that you avoid Bible bullets. And here's some Bible bullets. God needed another angel. They're better off. It was God's will. And every time in my class I say to officers, how many of you have heard a pastor say that 95% of their hands go up?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was on death notification. I wasn't actually doing the notification, but I was assisting. I was present. And the person making the notification said that God doesn't make mistakes. And I know that can be a refrain that people use, and they mean it in a positive way. I'm not criticizing whatever tradition of church that you come from. But in that moment, what that communicated to the mother whose son was killed was that God wanted her son to die that day. And I don't know if you can prove that theologically. Maybe that is what you believe. I don't know. But man, the effect of that is that now that woman is embittered against God for God having done something to her. And God, I don't know that God had anything to do with that particular incident.
I couldn't agree with you more. And when the officer, or if the officer says something like that, it makes the experience even worse. And why we teach death notification in every single peer support class is, for every officer that's listening, it's not if you do a death notification, it is when. Mm-hmm. So if we can't do a good one, we know we can do a bad one. Let's do a correct one. Let's be caring and honest. And I love what you said there. I wish it hadn't been said, but so many officers and civilians have heard that.
Right.
And those words bring hurt and pain.
Well, it's being unprepared emotionally and just logistically. You're not working off a script. You're making it up. You're shooting from the hip. And so you start pulling from things you've heard. Even if you don't necessarily agree or think it's a good idea, you're scrambling. You're grabbing for whatever you can grab out of the back of your brain that sounds helpful and religious and whatever. It may not be good. You'd be better off to have a bit of a script. You'd be better off to have rehearsed this. You'd be better off to have practiced. Because like you said, there's not necessarily a good notification, but you sure can do a bad one. Absolutely.
In those Bible bullets, almost every time I do a section on death notification, on the break, somebody comes up to me and tells me about a bad death notification.
Yeah. I had a notification once where it's 2:00 in the morning, and I go up to the patrol car. I arrive at the address, and I see the officer sitting in their car. And I go up and I ask, okay, what's the information? I got my notebook out. And they're like, well, so-and-so died in custody in a jail a couple counties away, and we believe the sister is in this house. And I'm like, okay, all right. And so got the sister's name, got the birth dates and identifiers for the deceased, and got it all written down. And I said, anything else I need to know? They go, yeah, this is a drug house. I'm like, okay. So that's, who knows what we'll find, and we're probably not going to be welcomed in to come sit down. So if that's part of your game plan, is that every time you do a notification, you're going to get to sit down on the couch in the living room and be served tea, that's probably not going to happen this time. So I get up there, and I'm in KCK, and I go up this little concrete porch and knock on the screen door, do my little police knock. And right as I'm striking the door for the first knock, I look over my shoulder, and the cops are taking up like tactical positions around the corner. I thought they were right behind me. Oh, no. They're 20 feet this way and 30 feet that way, and they're like surrounding. Like, I feel like I'm the bait in the trap. I'm the cheese on the mouse trap. And I'm like, and I can't take it away because I've already knocked. I've already hit that. So I'm like one knock into my 3 knock, police knock that I do. And so I knock, and this woman answers the door, and I can see there's an individual on the couch. She's at the door, but she only opens the door like an inch. And I identified her. She's the one we were looking for. And I had to do that notification through a 1-inch crack in the screen door. The screen door was open, the regular door. And I did that entire notification through a 1-inch crack. And as soon as I gave that to her, she said, okay, and closed the door. And she was not going to let the police or the police chaplain come in. And that was the notification.
Wow.
And that's not what you plan for. That's not what you want to have happen. But sometimes that's how it goes.
In our trainings, we address that America's not become more friendly, it's becoming less friendly. 20 years ago, we would teach come in and sit down. Yep. The majority of my death notifications today, not that extreme, but they're done on the doorstep.
At the door. Yeah, I've had others at the door. They're typically a little more friendly than that, but yeah. Yeah, a lot of times.
It used to be 20 years ago when I started as a chaplain, you would always get invited in, and once in a while you'd do it at the door. It's flipped in 20 years.
Yep.
Now it's almost always at the door, and once in a while you go in.
Yeah.
It's just flipped.
Yeah. I have a set of scenarios where I've done a lot of notifications over the years, and I have scenarios, in fact, they're on index cards right over there on that shelf. When I teach at the police academy, I have these situations that I've actually done that are written out as scenarios, the receiver and the person doing the notification. And everybody's names have been changed. It's all John Doe and Jane Doe and that kind of thing. But one of those scenarios that I then play act with the officers while they're at the academy, we role play and do
That's
these
awesome.
notifications. And there's all extremes, and everyone loves the one where the grandpa curses at the officer because they want to play the grandpa and curse at their fellow academy classmates, but they're all real life. They're all real life things, and I've been there. I was with the police department or the sheriff's office and making those notifications. And one of those scenarios is the nicest people I've ever met. There was a young man killed on the highway, wrong way. Drunk driver coming the other way. He was between jobs, going from one job to another job. Young man working multiple jobs, got hit by that drunk driver and killed. And we went at 5, maybe 6 o'clock in the morning to this family to tell them that their son had died. And these people were the most hospitable, kindest. I mean, it makes me want to weep just thinking about them. And I tell them when I'm coaching these academy recruits, I'm like, now listen, the other guy's out there in the hallway, he's about to knock on the classroom door and reenact this notification. Let me tell you, in real life, you're playing the role of the nicest people you have ever met. You need to, when he knocks on the door, he doesn't know what he's going to find because his card doesn't tell him any of that information. He just knows about the traffic accident. When you answer the door, your mom and dad, you are apologetic that he has to break this news to you.
Wow.
And you want to offer him food. You want to make him breakfast. You want to do anything you can. And I've had recruits start crying in the middle of this. And let me tell you, I was there in the real life version of it. It had the same impact on us.
Wow.
We couldn't believe how hospitable, how kind these people were receiving the worst news of their life, that their young adult son had been killed. So you never know what to expect. Sometimes it's really bad. Sometimes it's really good. But it's an important function that officers do, and hopefully chaplains can assist in.
You already nailed it, and I'm going to dovetail onto that. So when we perform the death notification, sometimes as a chaplain, we're there performing it. Sometimes the officer's there. We're there for support. Sometimes the officer needs a debrief from the debrief. Mm-hmm. And so, for example, one officer, this was years ago, and I know paramedic medicine has changed, but they were doing mouth-to-mouth on a 3-month-old baby. They had beaten the medical response ambulance there, so you don't just watch the baby die. There's a faint pulse. You got a police officer, 20-something-year-old out of the academy. He starts doing mouth-to-mouth, and the baby expires. So now it turns into a death notification. And that officer, for me to try to be there and just be with them and be emotionally present. So many times with police, we think PTSD, it was a gunfight. Somebody tried to take my gun. Somebody's choking me out. A police officer that spends 15 minutes mouth to mouth on a 3-month-old baby that dies. It was the same trauma as an officer that had been in a gunfight. Yeah,
that may stick with them and wound them emotionally in a way that
yes,
almost nothing else could. Yeah.
And so for the chaplain or the peer support team member, after the death notification, the ministry or service is not over. Now you're trying to be emotionally present for the officer.
Yeah. Barry, when you teach this, I've sat through several of your trainings. You teach death notifications in your level 1, right? Is that correct? Is that wrong?
It is. We do 7 levels of peer support chaplain training. Right. And level 1, we teach it, but a full unit. In the other 6 levels, we do a brief recap.
Why? Okay, that's what I wanted to ask. Why is it early? Let's say someone was able to take all your trainings in order. Why is it at the front end, and why do you recap it? Because I've seen that too.
The reason we do it at the front end is, in my opinion, we do 100 peer support chaplain trainings a year. 95% of death notifications are done incorrectly. I have a laundry list of police officers and firefighters that have reached out to me. Barry, I've been in 20 years of policing, and nobody has ever taught me how to do a death notification. Barry, I am a major at a police department of 700 sworn, and nobody has ever taught me how to do the death notification. So we do a whole unit on death notification level 1. Levels 2 to 7, we briefly recap it. And in all levels, we give every student a bookmark. And this is on one side, the 6 do's, and on the other side, the 10 don'ts. Because even me, and I wrote this curriculum, when I'm in a car, my sergeant has ordered me to go perform a death notification. I pull up to the person's house and I read the bookmark. I just take 30 seconds to get ready to deliver this.
Because it's emotional. It's seldom on your schedule. This is going to be at 2:00 in the morning, at 8:00 at night. You just never know when it's going to be. And even if you've done it 100 times, you can still do it wrong. And there's so much, you can never take it back. You got to do your best to give them a caring and honest death notification.
Yeah.
Thank you, Barry. I really appreciate this.
Man, it's been an honor to be here. And Jared, thank you for everything you do. For those listeners, I cannot encourage you enough to tell your other officers about Hey Chaplain. Every place I go, I tell every officer I can about the Hey Chaplain podcast. You are the real deal. It is an honor to be here.
Thank you so much, Barry. I want to thank Barry for coming in to give us just a sampling of his teaching on death notifications. And please let me endorse him as a trainer. I've sat through a lot of trainings by other people that were a little more than death by PowerPoint. If you're going to send a group to do peer support training, or if you're a first responder who would like to serve as a first responder chaplain after your time in uniform is complete, then please go to Barry's website, servingheroes.net, and find his next training in your area. I'll put the links in the show notes. The Hey Chaplain podcast is commercial-free because listeners buy me a $5 virtual coffee at buymeacoffee.com/HeyChaplain. You don't have to do that. You already get the show for free, but thank you for helping me to produce content that encourages police officers. The views expressed here are the personal views of the host and our guest and do not necessarily represent the views of any law enforcement agency or its components. If you like this episode, please share it with a cop or someone who loves a cop. Thank you for listening to Hey Chaplain, and as always, pray for peace in our city.